We have reports today that the homicide detective in charge of the Trayvon Martin case wanted to prosecute the shooter, George Zimmerman, the night of the killing. George Zimmerman's friend and defender is my first guest.
I just want this guy arrested, and so he can be brought to justice.
Justice.
Justice. Justice. Justice.
Justice. Justice.
Arrest needs to be made for George Michael Zimmerman.
Martin's parents today will take their fight to the steps of Capitol Hill.
The broad public perception was that a wrong was done here.
They say that there are a lot of leaks appearing in the press.
The police report has been leaked.
This was an attempt by supporters of George Zimmerman to smear Trayvon Martin.
The tone of things here continues to be very contentious.
There's still these calls for George Zimmerman to be arrested.
The police said they couldn't make an arrest.
It is unbelievable how this has been handled.
We have Zimmerman's version, but we'll never have Trayvon's.
The latest development in the killing of Trayvon Martin is that ABC News is now reporting that Chris Serino, the lead homicide investigator the night Trayvon Martin was killed, recommended that George Zimmerman be charged with manslaughter the night of the shooting. We contacted Detective Chris Serino tonight. He is a 15-year veteran of the Sanford Police Department and told us that he is observing the department's rules of not divulging any of the details of his investigation. But Detective Serino, the lead homicide investigator on the case the night of the shooting of Trayvon Martin, told us tonight that he feels very positive about the new investigations. He is very encouraged by those investigations, and his words, he is looking forward to the truth coming out. Joining me now is Joe Oliver, friend of George Zimmerman. Joe, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
First of all, how long have you known George Zimmerman?
I've known George about 6 years. I've known him ever since he started dating his wife. His mother-in-law is a close friend of the family.
So you've only known him socially?
Yes, mostly socially.
You've never been in the same workplace?
You know, I'm sure that information is out there, but I know where he works.
I've come across some information that indicates you've both worked at the same place at the same time. Can you confirm that?
You know, if you've come across that information, then you have come across that information. You know, I am not working right now as I'm trying to help George.
And how are you paying your expenses if you're not working? Is someone paying you to do this for George?
No, no one is paying me to do this for George. I've been trying to contact George since shortly after this happened because I was well aware of the firestorm of media interest that was going to happen. And I've been trying to contact him in order to offer my help because of my experience with the media. It wasn't until this weekend when I learned that he had retained an attorney that I contacted him through his attorney and spoke with him and validated for myself that I would be doing the right thing for standing up for George.
Joe, I want to get into how well you know him, and that's why I'm asking about the workplace. Did you spend time together in the workplace?
Occasionally, yeah.
Okay, and have you ever been alone with George Zimmerman?
Yes, I have.
In the workplace?
Yes, I have.
And did you have private conversations with him over the years about his experience with law enforcement?
Not his experience with law enforcement, but I've had conversations with him about why he was a criminal justice major.
And did you know him when he was arrested in 2005?
No, I did not.
Did he ever tell you about that?
No, I did not. But what I've learned from that arrest is that it was for coming to the aid of a friend who was being arrested as well.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly how that arrest was described by Agent Paul Fleischman. This is according to the Miami Herald today. Agent Paul Fleischman wrote that Zimmerman walked up to a pal under arrest and began chatting, refusing to leave. Zimmerman cursed him, Fleischman wrote, before pushing him and causing a short struggle. That is the police account of that arrest.
Well, you know, like I said, I wasn't there, and I would think that during that time, George may have been drinking. George, I don't know, because as long as I've known him, he hasn't drank.
Do you know that George, whether George had to enroll in anger management classes as a result of that case?
No, I don't, but I would imagine that that would have been part of what he went through in order to avoid any charges sticking.
And Joe, you got to know him first in the workplace or when he became engaged to someone you knew?
I've known him since he's met his now wife and started dating her.
And did that wife know that his previous fiancée had brought charges against him?
I would think so.
But you don't know that.
No, I don't.
Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Did her mother know that? Because you know her mother.
I don't know. You'd have to ask her.
Have you discussed that with anyone, the charges of violence brought against him by his former fiancée?
I've not had any reason to discuss the violent history he may have had.
Well, Joe,
and
here's why we're discussing.
Hang on, Lawrence. If you would allow me to answer your question completely and fully, then maybe we can go on with this discussion. Now, as far as what happened with George before I met him, for me, that's irrelevant, because whatever happened before I met him, he grew immensely from it to be a kind, gentle, giving and caring individual, one who I trusted with my own child.
So you don't think that anyone's violent history has anything to do with evaluating their credibility when they are engaged in a violent act that becomes controversial?
I think their violent history becomes a factor when they don't alter their violent behavior. That's when I think that becomes a factor. I mean, why would we have this system where we give people an opportunity to learn from their mistakes and grow from them? And George Zimmerman learned from his mistakes and grew from them.
What mistakes did George Zimmerman tell you about that, and what did he tell? How did he tell you he grew from his mistakes?
I'm just saying from what I have seen, the person that I know, the George Zimmerman I know, was not the George Zimmerman who was arrested in 2005. It's documented, if you've got the records there, that he did go through anger management. What's the point of having someone go through anger management if they're not going to alter their behavior? If George had to go through all of that,
Joe,
it was very successful. It was very successful.
Joe, come on, don't be silly.
No, I'm not being silly.
Just stop it. You don't believe that anger management actually successfully manages the anger of everyone who goes through anger management. You're not that naive about this.
And you know what? You're right. I'm not. And it doesn't work for everyone. And I didn't know that George had been through that. And if he had been through that, if he had been through that, then I know it worked for at least one person.
Okay, quickly. You said that you talked to him about this for the very first time on Saturday. Did his lawyer arrange that discussion, and did his lawyer participate in that discussion?
No, his lawyer did not participate in that discussion.
Okay. And you have said that you needed to have that conversation with him on Saturday in order to go out and publicly defend him. Tell us now what you learned from George Zimmerman on Saturday that you did not know before your conversation with him. What was the turning point in your conversation with him that changed your understanding of this so that you could confidently come here and defend him about his actions in something you did not witness?
My conversation with George was between me and George, and being an African-American male and understanding what was going on with George's involvement in this, and with my experience, I mean, first of all, I had to ask myself, what am I going to do for this person that I consider as a friend? I wasn't going to go off with just the information that was being fed out there, that all we knew about what had happened, which, again, if I didn't know George Zimmerman, I'd be outraged myself. There's no question about that.
Joe, these are your talking points that you've used on every show. That is a non-credible answer. You have claimed
That's your opinion.
You have claimed to have a conversation with him that changed your understanding of the facts, and now you want to go out publicly and say, I will not share with anyone what George Zimmerman told me to change my opinion of the facts so that I could go out and defend him. I don't want to hear your talking points that you've used on every show you've been on. Now, I have Charles Blow here with me from the New York Times. He has some questions for you.
Hi, Mr. Oliver, I'm just curious. You say you have known George Zimmerman for 6 years.
Yes, I have.
But you say you were close friends with George Zimmerman. However, he never shared with you.
Now let's back up. Because here you're going to continue. You're going to continue mischaracterizing what I've said. Because a lot of times
you were good friends with George Zimmerman. However, he never shared anything with you about his past. His violent past. He never shared with you whether or not he had been through any anger management courses. You said yesterday on television that you have not physically laid eyes on George Zimmerman since a week before this incident and have not to this day. How can you claim that you are a close friend of George Zimmerman when none of that is true of you? You don't really know George Zimmerman if you don't know those things about George Zimmerman, and if you don't know where George Zimmerman is, and if you have not seen him in over a month, and you have been going out saying that George cannot stop crying, which you cannot verify because you were not there. You have been saying, nope, you have been saying that there are lacerations and his nose is broken, and only thing you know is what George may have told you because you were not there and you have not seen him for over a month. None of this rings true. You're playing people like they're stupid, and we're not.
And I'm not a stupid man either. I know what I'm putting myself up against, and I know the repercussions of this. I'm stepping forward for George because this was not a racial incident. I'm stepping forward for George because of how it has ignited all the racial tensions that we've had here for years. I understand everything that everybody is out there marching about because I've experienced it myself. And I wouldn't put myself on the line like this if I didn't know in my heart that George Zimmerman was in a life or death struggle. I wouldn't be here. I would not be risking myself.
How do you know that in your heart? How do you know in your heart?
Have you ever had a gut feeling?
You were not there.
Have you ever had a gut feeling?
So this is a gut feeling.
There?
So this is not admissible in any court.
Were you there?
No, I'm asking you because you are the one who is saying you know in your heart that George Zimmerman was in a life or death situation, and I'm saying that we don't know. I'm saying that we have to wait till the investigation is finished, and you are saying that you know that that was George Zimmerman. You said on television that you know that that was George Zimmerman's voice crying out for help. And you have only known George for 6 years, and you have only seen him in social situations. His mother told me that she is absolutely 100% sure that that is her son, and she has known that boy for 17 years. She has heard him cry many times from a child all the way up to 17. She is saying, are you saying that you know George Zimmerman's voice better than Trayvon's mother knows his voice?
I'm saying, and as you know, Lawrence has pointed out, I've had numerous conversations with George, and because now it's been revealed.
Have you ever heard George Zimmerman scream?
You know what? What is the point of you asking me questions if you're not giving me an opportunity to answer? Okay?
Answer the question.
And as far as George raising his voice, yeah, I've heard him raise his voice before.
Scream.
Not in anger.
Scream.
Not in anger.
Scream.
But would you know what? Why are we having this discussion if you're not listening? If you're not listening to my answers, if you're not giving me a chance to finish my answers, why are we having this discussion?
Joe, let's see what we can do here. I've listened carefully. You've said for you the entire thing, your entire view comes down to a gut feeling. That's all it is. And okay, and I'm glad you clarified that.
Not just a gut feeling.
Joe,
not
Joe,
just,
look,
I've
Joe,
asked questions. I've asked questions. Can I answer that?
You know what,
Can I ask you why it's a gut feeling and why I feel good about it? Because it's an instinctual thing, and it's also because I've had what I have been told validated. What you have heard so far that has been leaked has been is validating what I've been told. There's other information that is yet to come out that we're waiting for the grand jury to pass down, okay? And when that comes down, then it's a question of whether or not anybody else believes what the investigation turns out. You know, we welcome the state's attorney looking into this. We welcome the grand jury. We welcome the Justice Department. We welcome all of this because, first of all, this was not a racial incident, and we welcome all of this because we know that if we weren't sitting here talking about George shooting Trayvon, we'd be talking about Trayvon shooting George.
Hey, Joe, we're going to get to that in a minute, the detail of that in a minute. I just want to explain to the audience that we've lost a little bit of the light in your studio, and so the image looks a little different here. I want to get to something that's been very important to a lot of people who saw you on Hardball yesterday, and I want to play a little clip of you there talking about this controversial element of the 911 tapes in which people think they hear a racial slur. And for you now, it seems to come down to a distinction of one letter. Is it a C or is it a G? Is it goon or is it the C word that goes with that? And I just want to listen to what you told Chris Matthews about that, and we'll try to get your light back while we're playing that tape. So let's just listen to this.
To me, it's a matter of interpretation of whether he's saying coon or goon. There are a lot of parts of this country where people proudly call themselves coon asses, in Louisiana in particular. And I don't know too many people who younger than 40 who use that term as a racial slur. As far as the other word, goon, I've been informed by my 17-year-old daughter that among her peers is a term of endearment.
Joe, as you know, there's been an awful lot of African-American reaction to that, starting with Charles Blow. Let's hear his reaction to that now.
Well, I grew up in Louisiana, and I have never once heard an African-American refer to an African-American in that way.
I never said an African-American.
Like you said before, you're going to let me finish.
I will.
And particularly as a term, any sort of term of endearment, and particularly, why would you insinuate that George Zimmerman was using that as a term of endearment, whether it's a C or a G, after the F word, about a person whom he found suspicious, about a person whom he was following with a gun? That is absolutely patently ridiculous.
You know, the characterization of what happened out there has been ridiculous, because the characterization that's been put out there is that George was following Trayvon with his gun drawn, and that's not correct.
Nobody said that. I didn't say that.
Joe, you're just dodging the question. But listen, we want to talk about this particular phrasing because it really has provoked a lot of outrage among African Americans. But Joe, please.
I will answer the question. I will answer the question because, you know, again, it all boils down to interpretation.
Joe, let me do this. Let me take a break right now so we can really fix your lighting during this commercial break, and then we want to hear your answer to this, because you know, as an African-American man, there are millions of people in this country who are very eager to hear you on this. We're going to take a break right now. We're going to be right back. Thank you, Joe. We're still working on getting the lighting right on Joe Oliver's studio in Florida, and I really want to commend him for showing up tonight, unlike George Zimmerman's lawyer last night, who literally ran out of that studio last night rather than face this kind of questioning. Joe Oliver is going to hang in there. He's going to stay with us. Charles Blow is going to be back. We're going to bring in Jonathan Capehart. We're going to have much more on this, and we will be joined later. We're back with Joe Oliver in a badly lit Orlando studio. Sorry about that lighting down there, Joe, and thank you very much. Hey, it looks a lot better now that they worked on it. So look, we left it with you and Charles Blow here in New York discussing this thing you said about what it is that George Zimmerman, your friend, said on the 911 tapes. I think, remember, there's two words there, Joe. There's two words. He doesn't just say goons, as you might like to think it is. And I noticed that in one of your interviews you said that your 17-year-old daughter has listened to it repeatedly. And she tells you, and she tells you that she loves George, but she's heard it both ways.
And I've heard it both ways as well.
So you've heard it with your own ears in the most offensive possible way.
I've heard it both ways listening to it.
And remember the word that comes before it, effing. Effing. That's not a word that tends to lead into a loving term.
You know, and goons has also been used as an insult to people as well.
Yes, it has. But which one do you think is worse for an African American?
Well, of course the other one's worse for an African American.
But why would you try to justify it and pretend it's an innocent thing on Hardball?
I'm not trying to justify it.
That's a terrible thing for George Zimmerman to have said, if he said it.
That's right. It is a terrible thing if he said it.
All right,
but what I'm trying to point out is that George Zimmerman is not a racist.
We're going to move on for Joe. We're going to let everyone listen to that tape themselves. I've said what I've heard. I heard the worst word that you could hear on that tape. You've heard both. That's okay. I accept that from you. We don't have to argue it anymore. And I'm glad we've moved off that stuff you were saying about it yesterday. I want to bring in Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post, who's been covering this very closely, Joe. And he's in Washington, going to join us by satellite. He has some questions for you, too.
Hi, Mr. Oliver. Thanks for being here. So you've said that you've known George Zimmerman for 6 years.
Yes.
And one of the things that we know about George Zimmerman is that he's wanted to be in law enforcement. In fact, you just said in the beginning of the interview that he was a criminal justice major, right?
Correct.
So did he ever talk to you about his desire to be in law enforcement?
Yeah, we talked about it briefly, about what he was majoring in and what he wanted to do with his future. And basically he generalized it in that he was a criminal justice major and he wanted to do something in law.
But did he specify what exactly? Because law enforcement is a very large field.
Yeah, I mean, he specified that, you know, he wanted to try and get into police work and possibly become a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. And so possibly get into police work. Did he try?
I don't know if he did. Can I, you know, I want to point out, and I'll clarify my relationship with George, because the characterization has been as a close friend. I'm being described as a close friend because I'm the only one who's speaking out for him. But my relationship with George is more of an older uncle. I'm old enough to be his father.
Well, right. Well, all the more reason for him to confide in you and to talk to you and to seek advice about all of life's mysteries. So, I mean, I think, you know, the questions I'm asking, they should be questions you ought to be able to answer as someone who is an uncle figure or a mentor, someone older than George.
Yeah, we've had those discussions before at family gatherings. But you have to understand that at those family gatherings, George was probably the only one who wasn't drinking, for one. For another, you know, the discussions that you're talking about that you think we should have had in order to validate whether or not I, you know, should be here talking on his behalf, those are discussions I'm sure he had with his father. I mean, the discussions that I've had with George have been, in general, have been about our you know, our mutual acquaintances, about what's going on with each other.
So you're not,
and it's not something that you're going to take notes about. And you
so
know,
just to be, so Mr. Oliver, just to be clear, so you're not a close friend of George Zimmerman's. At best, judging by your last answer, you're really just an acquaintance.
Well, the close was not ever my term. That close term was coined ever since I came forward to speak on his behalf.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry, Lawrence. I know this is your show.
Go ahead.
So he never, so George Zimmerman never talked to you about, you know, being a part of the neighborhood watch, about what that meant to him, about what it meant to him to serve his community. He never talked to you about that?
I've never asked him specifically, you know, what that meant for him to do it, but
he never volunteered it.
No, because I never asked.
Joe, it's Lawrence O'Donnell here. I have to say, I've never used the phrase close friend because I didn't have enough evidence to indicate you were a close friend. And when I discovered today that you both were, in my own investigation, that you both were in the same workplace, that seemed to be the only place where you might find yourself in a situation alone with him, because you've been saying that all your gatherings with him have been family-based. But, Joe, this is the problem. The problem is that you've identified on this show that the only reason you believe George Zimmerman's account of what happened is your own personal gut feeling. That is not good enough for America, Joe, and you have to know that. That is not good enough for a jury, Joe, and you have to know that. You have to know, Joe, that you would not be a witness in this case.
Oh, I don't want to be a witness in this case.
Well, you may be, Joe, you may be, because you had an unprotected conversation with him on Saturday that is relevant to the case, and so you should be subpoenaed and questioned under oath about exactly what he talked to you about. And if you're not, that's an incompetent investigation going on in Florida. Has anyone reached out to you from law enforcement since you publicly said you had a conversation with Zimmerman on Saturday and asked to interview you and put you under oath about that conversation?
No, no one has.
Joe, you're a mystery man to me, because you're doing this on such a slim basis of a gut feeling. You've given up your job. You know, I don't understand how you give up your job and your income to go out here and do this public relations job for George Zimmerman. I don't understand how you can afford to do this. It's strange seeming behavior, Joe. It doesn't add up to me. And then yesterday on Hardball, you were saying these wildly nutty things about that racial slur, just anything you could say to defend this guy on the basis of nothing but a gut feeling. Your role in this, Joe, just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it just doesn't make sense. And I'll agree with you. My role in this, I agree, just doesn't make sense. But because of the person that I know, that I've grown to know over the past years, that I've seen even more since you've revealed that we are co-workers, since he got his job, that you've got to validate for yourself and reconcile for yourself whether or not this is a bad person. Well, this is not a bad person. This is a very good person who grew from his previous mistakes some 7 years ago. And if you ever got to know him, you wouldn't even suspect that he had those problems some 7 years ago.
We got to go, but listen, you've told us, you don't even have a consistent story. You've told us you don't know what his mistakes were. Then you tell us he grew from them. Then you tell us you're not sure if he did anger management. Then you're pretty sure he did do anger management. You know about the arrest. You don't know if his current wife knew about his previous fiance's violent complaints against him and the injunction against him that the previous fiance got. There's so much you don't know, Joe, and you want America. You go on national television like this, CNN, all these other shows, and you say to America, believe me, I can vouch for the man who shot and killed Trayvon Martin because I, Joe Oliver, have a completely inexplicable and unjustifiable gut feeling. Joe, it is not good enough for America.
It is good enough for me.
Okay.
You can't even say that it predates what you know of him, because you say you know him for the last 6 years. That is a period over which he has called 911 on people in his community for 46 times. Did he talk to you about any of those 46 times that he called 911 on people in that community, yes or no?
Why would he?
So that's right. You don't know this man. Thank you.
Joe Oliver, we're going way into
overtime. And you don't know this man either.
I don't know it, but I'm not on television claiming to know him. That is what you are doing, sir. I am not claiming to know anybody in this case. I have never met Trayvon Martin. I have never met George Zimmerman. You are claiming to be a friend or confidant or whatever, or uncle or whatever you are claiming to be for George Zimmerman, and you don't know anything about George Zimmerman. You don't know that he's on the phone all the time thinking that people are suspicious of whether or not they're 7 or 9 years old playing in a driveway, or whether he's calling on Trayvon Martin. You don't know George Zimmerman. You know a little bit about this guy, and you're relating something based, like you said, on a gut feeling, because like you said, you would not describe yourself as a close friend of George Zimmerman, and that's it.
And I know enough about George Zimmerman to put myself in this position.
Okay, Joe, I want to thank you very much for coming in tonight. You can go off and do other television interviews, and they're all going to be easier than this one, and you knew that before this one started. I appreciate you coming in and doing this tonight. It was more than the lawyer representing George Zimmerman was willing to do last night. He ran out of that chair that you're sitting in tonight, and I thank you very much for staying with us and doing this extra time with us tonight. Joe Oliver, I think you've clarified a lot about what your position on this comes from. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay. We're going to take a break right here. We're going to be back with our panel. We're going to be joined by Jonathan Capehart, Natalie Jackson, who's one of the attorneys for the family, and of course, Charles Blow, and we will get to Rachel Maddow. I have 3 people who are absolutely stunned by what they just heard from Joe Oliver, the friend of George Zimmerman. Charles Blow, Jonathan Capehart, and Natalie Jackson, an attorney for the Martin family, are going to join me to talk about what we just heard here. And Rachel Maddow is going to join me later. And we're back with Charles M. Blow, New York Times columnist, and Jonathan Capehart, MSNBC contributor and opinion writer for the Washington Post. And we're joined now by Natalie Jackson, co-counsel for the Martin family. Natalie, based on what you just heard, do you think that Joe Oliver should be questioned by the investigators in this case about the substance of his conversation with George Zimmerman on Saturday?
I definitely think he needs to be questioned. That's called an admission by party. Whatever information that George Zimmerman gave him will be valuable information for this investigation.
Charles, today you tweeted, I think while watching Joe Oliver on TV this morning with maybe Soledad O'Brien on CNN, please someone put me on TV with Joe Oliver. I saw that knowing that we had Joe Oliver booked yesterday. We had him booked.
You set me up.
And I didn't set you up, but I just said, okay.
Myself
I said, okay, we're getting
down.
Charles. I know it was frustrating. Strange experience.
Yes, I mean, well, what you quickly come away with the idea, and he admitted it tonight, he is not a close friend of George Zimmerman. He could not even contact George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman has not contacted him. He admits himself that he had not seen George Zimmerman since a week before the shooting of Trayvon Martin. That, to me, does not sound like a close friend, or uncle, or anything else. And that is what we needed to hear him say out of his own mouth, and that's what he said tonight.
Jonathan Capehart, Joe Oliver used to be a CNN reporter. He knows the tools of your trade. He knows what was going to happen, what was going to be relevant when he came out publicly. We discovered here tonight that he did indeed work in the same place as George Zimmerman, something I discovered in my investigation today. And yet he does not want to talk about that. He thinks there's things about his relationship with George Zimmerman that he can protect and keep secret, while he tells the world, trust my gut feeling and nothing but my gut feeling that George is telling the truth.
Right, and that's so not going to work, not under normal circumstances, and certainly not under circumstances like this, where there is a dead 17-year-old boy who was unarmed at the hands of someone who he wants us to believe is his close friend, George Zimmerman, but so close of a friend, someone who he said, I'm older than George. He looks at me like an uncle, like a mentor even, and yet this same person doesn't talk to him about his dreams and aspirations. He knows that George Zimmerman was majoring in criminal justice, yet he doesn't know about any attempts by George Zimmerman to join law enforcement, any of the, the rejections or the acceptances. I mean, from everything that Charles was able to get out of him in terms of whether he was really a good friend of George Zimmerman's or not, plus my being able to just find out that if you really are a good friend and you know that this person is trying to get into law enforcement and that's something that this person really wants to do, you know about that. You know what they want to do. You know what they've been trying to do. Close friends know that. Even very strong acquaintances know that. Given the interview he just gave here tonight, he's not even a close acquaintance. He's just some guy.
Natalie Jackson, I think we just ripped away the veneer of what the Joe Oliver TV act is. There's absolutely nothing there except a guy who, for some strange reason, inexplicable, I just confessed to the audience, I find it inexplicable that he's dropped everything, he's dropped his job, he's dropped his income, simply to go on television on the basis of nothing other than, when you get right down to it, than a gut feeling. He must have been counting on, and he has gotten an awful lot of softball interviews on television that made him think he could get away with that.
Yeah, this is a man who has inserted himself into this. He's not a witness in this case. He can't provide anything valuable to the trial. He doesn't know. He was not there. You brought home a point, and I do hope these investigators talk to him. I hope that they get whatever stories. He's put about 3 versions of George Zimmerman's story. I believe that he's vetting his story through the press. I believe that that is what he's doing, and our team believes that. But we've kind of ignored the Joe Oliver because we are asking for an arrest in this case. Anything else is up to the jury. There are witnesses that were actually there.
Natalie, quickly before we go, I want to read you something that Angela Corey, the special prosecutor, said to the LA Times. She said, it's possible that we'll just make a decision without the grand jury. Now, it seems to me, in my experience, the only decision they would dare to make without the grand jury is to go ahead and prosecute.
And I agree with that. Now, we are still under the impression that the grand jury will go on April 10th. That is what they have told us, and that is what we're going with. However, we need look no further than Zimmerman's own words. We don't have to listen to Joe Oliver. We have tapes with Zimmerman's own words. These a-holes always get away. He's running away. I'm going after him. We have that. That is enough to arrest George Zimmerman and to have a jury and a trial listen to people who actually know about what happened and for what they speak of, and not the Joe Olivers of the world.
That's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for listening to that interview, for participating in it. Jonathan and Charles.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Charles Breaux, Jonathan Capehart, Natalie Jackson.